He thought his wife died in the war, until two girls came to call him father. John Matthews had never imagined that a single moment could change the course of his life forever. The morning he received the news, he felt the ground fall beneath his feet. The war had taken so many lives, but he had convinced himself that somehow he and Sarah would survive it together. They had promised each other that no matter what, they would find each other again. He had held on to that promise tightly. But the letter in his hand said otherwise. It was brief, just a few lines written by someone in the town's council after the bombing. "We regret to inform you, Sarah Matthews, presumed dead." The words blurred as he read them again and again. John sat down on the wooden crate in the middle of his small room, feeling a cold emptiness in his chest. He could not believe it. He wanted to scream, to curse the war, to shake the world for taking her from him. But all he could do was sit there, staring at the paper as if it contained some hidden truth he could not yet see. The war had changed everything. The front lines had been a place of constant fear, and John had seen more death than he cared to remember. Every day he had worried about his own survival. But more than that, he worried about Sarah. She had been so strong, so full of life, but she was far away in a town that had become just another target. Letters had been slow, sometimes taking weeks or months to reach him, and often arriving too late. Some letters never arrived at all. John had learned to hold on to hope in small pieces, a word here, a short note there, but now that hope felt crushed. After receiving the letter, John wandered through the ruins of his hometown, which had been spared some of the worst destruction but still bore the marks of the war. Streets were empty, stores closed, and people moved quickly, avoiding the memories of what had been lost. The air smelled of smoke and dust, a constant reminder of the chaos that had consumed so many lives. Everywhere he looked, John saw reminders of what he had left behind when he went to fight. His favorite bakery had a broken window. The park where he and Sarah had walked hand in hand was littered with rubble. He tried to imagine Sarah alive in another place, perhaps hiding, waiting, but the words of the letter kept returning to him, presumed dead. The certainty in that phrasing was unbearable. He remembered their last moments together before he left for the front. She had hugged him tightly, her tears soaking his uniform, and whispered that he must come back to her. He had promised, with all the strength he had, that he would. And now he felt that promise was meaningless. John spent the next few days in a haze. He could not eat properly, could not sleep. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw Sarah's face, smiling at him, and then the devastation of the town, the fire, the rubble. He thought about the little things, her laugh, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the warmth of her hand in his. He clung to these memories as if they were a lifeline, but they only made the emptiness in his heart feel deeper. The townspeople were kind but distant. They spoke in quiet tones about the war, about the losses everyone had suffered. Many had lost family members, friends, or neighbors. John realized that he was not alone in his grief, but somehow that did not make it easier. He wandered the streets, visiting places he and Sarah had loved. The small cafe where they had shared countless cups of coffee was now shuttered, the windows covered in soot. The bookstore where she had spent hours browsing novels was gone. He felt as though the world had changed overnight, and the person he had loved most was gone with it. In the evenings, John would sit by the window of his small apartment, staring at the fading sunlight. The city outside seemed calm, almost peaceful, but inside he felt a storm that would not end. He thought about the future, and the thought itself was unbearable. How could he go on without Sarah? How could he find meaning in a life that had been shattered so completely? He tried to imagine a life where he could be happy again, but every vision ended with the memory of her smile fading into darkness. One night, John walked to the river that ran through the town. He remembered the many times he and Sarah had come there, laughing as they skipped stones across the water. The river was calm now, reflecting the pale light of the moon. He knelt by the edge, dipping his fingers into the cool water, and whispered her name, Sarah. His voice broke as the wind carried the word away. He felt a tear slide down his cheek and did not try to stop it. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his grief. Days turned into weeks, and John began to fall into a routine. He returned to work where he repaired damaged buildings and helped rebuild what the war had destroyed. His hands were busy, and his mind was quiet for short periods, but the sorrow never left. He moved through the motions, feeding himself and sleeping, but never truly living. Every small task reminded him of Sarah, the meals she would have cooked, the small details she would have noticed. Everything was a reminder of a life that had been taken from him. Friends who had survived the war tried to reach out to him. They invited him to gatherings, to share stories of the past, and find comfort in friendship. John accepted some invitations, but often left early, feeling that no conversation could fill the void left by Sarah's absence. He would watch other couples together, children playing with their parents, and feel a sharp ache in his chest. The world seemed to move on without him, leaving him behind in a place of silent mourning. One evening, as he sat alone in his apartment, John took out an old photograph of Sarah. She was smiling, her eyes bright with life, standing beside him on the day they had first moved into their small home. He traced the lines of her face with his fingers, remembering the warmth of her presence. "I will never forget you," he whispered. "I will carry you with me always." That night, he did not sleep, instead keeping the photo close and remembering every moment they had shared. Though he felt the pain of loss every day, John began to notice small signs of life returning. The sun shone a little brighter, the birds chirped outside his window, and neighbors began to rebuild their lives. He realized that while his heart was broken, the world itself continued. He did not yet know how to move forward, but he felt a tiny spark of determination, a desire to survive, not just exist. Sarah would have wanted him to live, to find meaning again, even if she was gone. And John's grief was profound, but it was also the foundation of his love. It reminded him of what had been precious in life, and slowly he began to carry her memory with him in a way that was not only painful, but also sustaining. Every step he took, every small act of rebuilding, was done with her in mind. Though he thought his life was over when the letter arrived, he began to understand that surviving the war meant more than just keeping his body alive. It meant keeping the love he had for Sarah alive in his heart. He never stopped longing for her, never stopped hoping that perhaps, somehow, there was still a chance. That hope was faint, fragile, but it was enough to keep him moving through the empty streets, through the quiet nights, and through the long days that seemed to stretch endlessly. John Matthews had lost the love of his life, or so he believed, but even in the darkness of grief he carried a flicker of light, a memory, a promise, and a love that death could not fully take away. After the war, John Matthews found himself in a world that had changed, but he had not. Every street, every building, every familiar corner of his town reminded him of what he had lost. Yet, he went about his days as if moving through a dream, awake, but not fully alive. He returned to work, fixing what the bombs and destruction had left behind. He repaired roofs, patched walls, and cleaned streets, helping neighbors rebuild their homes. Though his hands were busy, his mind remained trapped in memories of Sarah, and each repair felt like a way to hold on to the past he could no longer touch. John lived alone in the small apartment he had shared with Sarah. Each morning, he would wake before sunrise, quietly preparing breakfast for himself, and then leave for work. The apartment was filled with traces of Sarah's presence, the small teacups she liked, the books she had left open on the table, and the little vase where she used to keep fresh flowers. He could not bring himself to remove these reminders. They were painful, yet he feared that forgetting them would mean forgetting her entirely. He kept himself busy to avoid the emptiness. He helped neighbors rebuild fences, cleared debris from the streets, and volunteered when he could. People spoke kindly to him, but no one truly knew the depth of his sadness. John smiled when he needed to, nodded when people greeted him, but inside, he was quiet and heavy with grief. He could not speak about Sarah without breaking down. Every time someone mentioned a loved one lost in the war, he nodded, understanding their pain, but never revealing his own. At night, John's loneliness was strongest. He would sit by the window, listening to the distant sounds of life around him, children laughing, neighbors talking, dogs barking, and feel both comforted and painfully aware of what he could no longer have. He thought about the family he and Sarah had dreamed of. They had often spoken about having children, about what their home would look like, about how Sarah would read bedtime stories and he would teach them to ride bikes. That dream felt shattered, buried, under the weight of loss. John tried to find some comfort in routines. He visited the small market each morning, buying the same bread and vegetables he and Sarah had enjoyed together. He walked past the places they had once visited, the cafe where they had shared coffee, the park where they had sat under the old oak tree. Each step was a mixture of joy and pain, a reminder of love lost. Some days he would speak softly to her memory, whispering things he wished he could tell her in person. His friends tried to help, though they often did not know how. Some invited him to gatherings, hoping he would talk and laugh again. Others asked him to join them for meals, to step out of the isolation he had wrapped himself in. John attended these invitations occasionally, but always with a heavy heart. He felt out of place, as if he were a shadow moving through the world of the living. The laughter of others reminded him of what he had lost, and sometimes it hurt more than being alone. Even so, life continued. Seasons changed, and with them came the rhythms of the town. In spring, he noticed the flowers beginning to bloom in the park, the soft green of new leaves on trees. In summer, he walked past children playing in the streets, their laughter echoing like music he could not fully hear. In autumn, he would watch the leaves fall, remembering walks with Sarah among the golden colors. And in winter, the cold and quiet nights reminded him of the loneliness that never truly left him. Each season was a reminder that the world moved forward, whether he was ready or not. John often found himself reflecting on the nature of hope. He had once believed that love could survive anything, that he and Sarah would always find each other, no matter the circumstances. The war had tested that belief, and for a time he felt it was gone. Yet, deep inside, he held a quiet, fragile hope. The hope that somehow, some way, Sarah might still be alive. It was a thought he did not dare to speak aloud, not even to himself most days, because fear of disappointment was too great. Still, it lingered, a small flame in the darkness. During these quiet years, John began to notice the kindness of strangers. A woman who ran the bakery would save him a small loaf of bread, understanding that he often came late and missed her regular customers. A neighbor would invite him in for tea, sitting quietly with him without forcing conversation. These small gestures reminded him that the world, though painful, also contained goodness. Slowly, John began to let small moments of connection enter his life, even if they could not replace what he had lost. He also began to take care of his own body and health, something he had neglected during the war. He went for long walks each morning, feeling the sun on his face and the wind in his hair. He lifted heavy beams and stones during his work, feeling the strength in his arms and legs. These physical tasks became a kind of therapy, a way to keep moving, even when his heart felt stuck in sorrow. He noticed that each day he could walk a little further, lift a little more, and breathe a little easier. Though he tried to keep busy, memories of Sarah were never far from his mind. He remembered her voice, gentle and comforting, and her laugh, light and full of joy. He remembered the small things she did that made life brighter. The way she would leave notes for him to find, the meals she would prepare with care, the way she always knew when he needed encouragement. These memories were bittersweet, filling him with both pain and gratitude. He realized that even in her absence, Sarah's presence was a part of who he was. John also began to reflect on the choices he had made during the war. He thought about the dangers he had faced, the friends he had lost, and the decisions that had saved or endangered lives. He carried some guilt, wondering if he could have done more to protect Sarah or communicate with her. But over time, he understood that many things were beyond his control, and that life sometimes took paths that could not be predicted. Accepting this slowly allowed him to focus on what he could do: rebuild, help others, and honor the love he had lost. In the evenings, John would sometimes write letters that he never sent. He poured his thoughts onto paper, telling Sarah everything he wished he could say to her. He wrote about the days, the small acts of kindness he had witnessed, and the moments that reminded him of her. Sometimes he would read these letters aloud, speaking to the empty room as if she were listening. The act of writing and speaking helped him process his grief and kept the memory of their love alive. Even though life seemed quiet and uneventful, small sparks of joy began to appear. A neighbor's child would run to greet him, laughing and calling his name. A stray dog began following him on his walks, sitting patiently by his side. A young woman in town shared a smile or a kind word as he passed. These moments were tiny, almost invisible, but they reminded John that life had not ended. There was still beauty, still connection, still something worth living for. John's friends noticed the change in him, though it was slow. He was still quiet, still reserved, but there was a subtle strength in the way he carried himself. He laughed softly at jokes, offered help when needed, and occasionally joined conversations without withdrawing. These small signs showed that even in grief, healing could begin. Life was not the same as it had been, but perhaps it could be meaningful again. He began to realize that while Sarah's absence left a permanent void, it did not mean that he had to stop living. He could remember her, honor her, and carry her love in his heart while still participating in the world around him. The thought was both comforting and challenging, but he embraced it as a step toward survival, toward a life that could still contain hope, even if it was fragile. As the years passed, John remained devoted to his work, his neighbors, and the small routines that anchored him. He learned patience, resilience, and the quiet power of memory. He understood that grief was not something to overcome entirely, but something to live with, something that shaped him and reminded him of love's depth. Though he thought his life had ended when Sarah was lost, he slowly discovered that life, in its own way, continued to offer moments of connection, beauty, and purpose. John Matthews' days were simple, often lonely, but filled with the subtle textures of life, the warmth of sunlight, the sound of birds, the kindness of strangers. He learned that surviving loss did not mean forgetting, and that love could remain even in absence. And while he did not yet know what the future held, he began to open his heart, ever so slightly, to the possibility that life could bring unexpected surprises, and perhaps new beginnings. John Matthews had spent years building a quiet life, filling each day with small tasks, work, and routines to keep his grief at bay. He thought he had accepted the loss of Sarah, though a hollow part of his heart remained. He did not expect anything to disturb the calm of his quiet existence, not after all he had endured. But life, as he would soon learn, had a way of surprising even the most careful hearts. It was a warm afternoon in late spring. The sun poured golden light across the streets, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and the sounds of children playing. John had returned from repairing a neighbor's roof and was wiping the sweat from his brow. He had just opened the door to his apartment when he heard a timid voice calling his name. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned slowly, surprised. Standing at the doorstep were two girls, clutching each other's hands. The older one had hair the same shade of brown as Sarah's, and her eyes seemed strangely familiar. The younger girl looked shy, glancing up at her sister for reassurance. Both wore simple dresses, and their small faces were serious, as if they carried a weight far beyond their years. John froze, unsure what to say. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously. The older girl took a deep breath. "Are you John Matthews?" "Yes, I am," he replied, though suspicion and confusion clouded his mind. "Who are you?" The younger girl stepped forward, her small voice shaking. We are your daughters, Emily and Lucy. We came to find you." John felt as if the world had tilted beneath him. His mind spun with disbelief. Daughters? His mind raced through memories of Sarah, of their conversations about children, of dreams they had shared, and a rush of emotions hit him all at once. Shock, hope, fear, and confusion. He wanted to deny it, to tell them they had the wrong person, but something in their eyes made him pause. There was a certainty there that he could not ignore. "Daughters?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. I don't understand. Sarah, he could not bring himself to say it aloud, that he had believed she was dead, that he thought the possibility of children was gone forever. Emily, the older girl, spoke again, her voice steady. "Mom told us about you. She wanted us to find you. She wanted you to know us. She tried to write, but the letters never reached you." John's heart pounded. He sank into a chair, unable to speak. The girls were real. Sarah had survived. And somehow, after all the chaos, the children she had carried were standing in front of him, calling him father. He could feel his breath catching in his throat, tears threatening to spill, and a strange mixture of joy and sorrow pressing heavily on his chest. He studied their faces carefully, searching for a connection. There was a softness in Emily's eyes that mirrored Sarah's gentle gaze, and Lucy's small hand held her sister's with the same careful affection John remembered from Sarah's touches. Every feature, every gesture, seemed to echo the woman he had loved and lost. And suddenly, he believed them. They were his daughters. John struggled to find words. I don't know what to say. I thought Sarah was gone. I thought. His voice broke. The years of grief and loneliness seemed to pour out in a single moment. I thought I had lost everything. Emily stepped closer. You didn't lose everything. We are here. We found you. We want to be with you." Lucy added softly, "We want you to be our father. Please." For a long moment, John could only sit in silence, his mind racing to comprehend what was happening. He thought of all the years he had spent alone, walking the streets, fixing houses, and keeping Sarah's memory alive. He thought of the lonely nights, the letters he had written that never reached her, and the empty apartment that had become his sanctuary and his prison. And now, suddenly, the impossible had arrived. 2 living reminders of the love he had thought lost forever. He stood slowly, kneeling to meet their eyes. I don't know how to do this. I have been alone for so long. I don't know if I can be the father you deserve." Emily shook her head. "You don't have to know everything. We just want you. We just want you to be our father. Mom told us about you. She said you loved her very much." John felt tears slipping down his face. He reached out tentatively, placing a hand on Emily's shoulder. She did not flinch. He then touched Lucy's hand, and she squeezed his fingers gently. The connection was immediate and undeniable. His heart, which had been heavy with grief for so long, began to stir with a feeling he had not experienced in years: hope. They spent the afternoon talking, though slowly and carefully. The girls told him about their lives, about the time they had spent in foster care, and how they had searched for him. John listened, sometimes interrupting with questions, sometimes sitting in stunned silence. Every detail they shared made him feel both joy and sorrow. He was overjoyed to finally know them, yet sorrowful for all the years he had missed. Emily described their mother's courage, the hardships they had endured, and the love that Sarah had carried for him all these years. Lucy added little stories about their day-to-day life, small memories that made John laugh through his tears. He marveled at how much they resembled Sarah, not just in appearance, but in mannerisms, gestures, and even the small things they said. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room, John felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He had promised Sarah, in the quiet moments before the war, that he would always protect her, always care for her. Now, those promises extended to these 2 young girls, whose lives had been touched by loss just as his had. The weight of that responsibility was heavy, but it was not frightening. It was something he had been waiting for, even if he did not know it. He looked at Emily and Lucy and made a decision in his heart. "I don't know what the future will hold," he said softly. "I don't know how to be a father, but I promise this. I will do everything I can for you. I will not let you feel alone again. You are my daughters, and I will love you no matter what." The girls smiled, a mixture of relief and happiness shining in their eyes. They hugged him tightly, and for the first time in years, John felt complete. It was as if a missing piece of his life had finally returned. The house, once quiet and heavy with grief, was now filled with warmth and laughter, the first signs of a new chapter in their lives together. Over the next few days, John slowly began to adjust to their presence. He learned about their habits, their favorite foods, the way they liked to spend their time. Emily loved drawing, and John encouraged her, buying pencils and paper and praising her work. Lucy loved animals, and together they visited the small farm nearby, feeding chickens and watching the goats play. Each day brought new challenges and joys, and John realized that life could be full again, even after unimaginable loss. At night he would read stories to them before bed, just as he had imagined doing with Sarah. The sound of their voices, their laughter, and even their questions reminded him of the warmth he had thought was gone forever. He learned to cook for them, to listen to their concerns, and to offer comfort when they were scared or sad. Slowly, he became the father he had always wanted to be, even as he continued to carry Sarah's memory in his heart. Though the past could not be changed, John understood that the future was waiting to be written. These two young girls were a living connection to the woman he had loved, and now he had the opportunity to love again, to guide, protect, and nurture. He knew there would be challenges, but he felt ready to face them. The emptiness that had haunted him for years began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose and a new kind of hope. John Matthews' life had been marked by loss, grief, and solitude, but the arrival of Emily and Lucy opened a door he never thought he would see again. In their eyes he found Sarah's love reflected back at him, and in their hearts he found a reason to live fully once more. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in years, John felt that life could be beautiful again. And as he tucked the girls into bed that night, listening to their soft breathing, John whispered a promise to himself and to them. He would never let them feel alone, never let them doubt that they were loved. In the quiet of the night, surrounded by the warmth of his daughters, he finally allowed himself to hope for the future. Life had changed completely for John Matthews. The quiet, lonely years he had spent in grief seemed like a distant memory. Emily and Lucy were now living with him full-time, filling his days with laughter, questions, and boundless energy. Each morning, John woke to the sound of small voices calling his name, the sound of tiny feet running across the floor, and the smell of breakfast cooking in the kitchen. It was a new kind of life, chaotic at times, exhausting often, but filled with warmth and purpose he had not felt in years. John quickly realized that being a father was not simple. There were tears, disagreements, and days when he felt unsure if he was doing the right thing. Emily sometimes sulked when he corrected her drawing or reminded her to do her homework. Lucy would cry when she missed her mother or when she fell and scraped her knee. John had never been responsible for children before, and he had never imagined the weight of such responsibility. But he also felt a fierce determination to protect them, love them, and guide them. He thought of Sarah and the promises he had made, and he knew he would do everything in his power to honor her memory through the girls. Slowly, he began to establish routines. Mornings were for breakfast and school preparation. Afternoons were for homework, errands, and small household chores. Evenings were for stories, games, and quiet talks before bed. The house, once quiet and still, now echoed with the noise of life. John sometimes marveled at how much energy two small girls could bring into a home, and he realized that each day was an opportunity to learn and grow alongside them. One day, John took the girls to the park where he and Sarah had once walked. He watched Emily climb the swings and Lucy chase after a small dog, and a rush of memories filled him. He remembered Sarah laughing in the sunlight, her hand brushing against his, the way she would call to him with a smile. It was as if the park itself held fragments of the past, and now, through Emily and Lucy, those fragments had come alive again. John felt a deep sense of gratitude. Life had given him a second chance, and he was determined not to waste it. As the weeks turned into months, the bond between John and the girls grew stronger. They shared meals, chores, and small adventures, learning about each other and forming a rhythm that felt natural. Emily often helped John with cooking, her hands clumsy but eager, while Lucy loved sitting beside him as he fixed things around the house. John taught them how to care for the garden, how to ride a bicycle, and how to handle small challenges with patience and courage. Each day was a lesson, not just for the girls, but for John himself. who learned how to be patient, gentle, and understanding in ways he had never needed before. The neighbors began to notice the change in John. The once quiet, reserved man who had kept to himself was now laughing more, helping not just the girls, but also the community. People remarked on the warmth in his home, the joy that seemed to radiate from it, and the way the girls smiled freely and confidently. John realized that his life was no longer just about surviving. It was about living, truly living, with love, connection, and purpose. Despite the happiness, there were still moments of longing and remembrance. John often spoke to the girls about their mother, sharing stories of Sarah's courage, kindness, and love. He told them how much she had cared for him, how brave she had been during difficult times, and how proud she would be of them. Emily and Lucy listened intently, asking questions about their mother's life, and John answered honestly, even when the memories made him ache. He wanted them to know that their mother's love had never ended, and that it lived on in them. There were quiet nights when John would sit alone reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the years of grief, the loneliness, and the endless hope that Sarah might still be alive. He thought about the first time the girls appeared at his doorstep, the shock and the disbelief he had felt, and he felt a deep, overwhelming gratitude that life had given him a second chance, not just to love again, but to be loved in return. The emptiness that had once defined him was now replaced with a sense of belonging and joy. As the years passed, John watched Emily and Lucy grow. Emily blossomed into a thoughtful, creative young girl, always eager to help and learn. Lucy became confident and curious, full of energy and affection. John guided them through school, celebrated their achievements, and comforted them during setbacks. Each milestone, from the first day of school to their birthdays, became a family celebration, a reminder of how much love could heal even the deepest wounds. John also began to connect with the broader community in new ways. He helped organize small events for children, repaired homes for neighbors, and offered guidance to others who had experienced loss. His experiences had taught him resilience, patience, and the power of love, and he wanted to share those lessons with others. Through helping, he found purpose beyond his family, and it gave him a sense of fulfillment he had not known during the years of grief. Despite the busy life, John never forgot the quiet moments, the moments he spent reading with the girls at night, sharing stories about their mother, or simply holding their hands while they walked to school. Those moments became sacred, the foundation of a family built on love, trust, and shared memories. John understood that life was fragile and precious, and he cherished every day, every smile, every laugh, and even every tear. John's love for the girls grew deeper with each passing year. He found joy in the little things, Emily singing softly while drawing, Lucy's giggles during playtime, their warm hugs when they needed comfort. He realized that love was not just about grand gestures, but about being present, attentive, and patient. The girls, in turn, grew to trust him completely, relying on him for guidance, comfort, and protection. They called him Father with sincerity, and John embraced the title with pride and humility. One sunny afternoon, John took Emily and Lucy to the river near the town. It was the same river he and Sarah had visited long ago. They skipped stones together, laughed when the stones sank, and marveled at the reflections in the water. John felt a profound connection, a link between the past, when he had walked with Sarah, and the present, when he walked with his daughters. The continuity of love, despite loss and separation, filled him with a quiet sense of peace. John knew that life would not always be easy. There would be challenges, misunderstandings, and difficult days. But he also knew that love, patience, and commitment could overcome nearly anything. He vowed to always be there for Emily and Lucy, to guide them, protect them, and nurture their dreams. He understood that he could not replace their mother, but he could honor her memory and provide a life full of warmth, safety, and joy. In the evenings, John would sometimes sit by the fireplace, the girls asleep in their beds, reflecting on the journey that had brought them together. He thought about the years of grief, the loneliness, and the hope that had never fully left him. He thought about the moment they had appeared at his doorstep, the shock and the joy he had felt. And he felt a deep sense of gratitude for the unexpected gift of family, love, and second chances. John Matthews' story was one of loss, hope, and renewal. He had once believed that the war had taken everything he loved, leaving him alone and broken. But life had shown him that love could return in ways he could not imagine. Emily and Lucy were living proof that hope and love could endure, even after years of hardship and sorrow. Together, they had built a home filled with laughter, warmth, and connection. The story of John and his daughters became one of quiet inspiration. It reminded the town and those who knew them that life could offer second chances, that love could endure, and that even in the darkest moments, hope could be found. John had learned that grief did not have to define a person, and that the heart could heal and grow stronger, even after unimaginable loss. And so, John Matthews, once a man broken by war and loss, found himself surrounded by love once again. Emily and Lucy were more than his daughters. They were a living connection to the woman he had loved, a reminder that life could continue beautifully, and proof that family could be rebuilt even after the harshest storms. Each day he embraced the new life before him with gratitude, joy, and unwavering love. In the quiet moments when he watched the girls sleeping peacefully or laughing in the sunlight, John knew that the promise he had made to Sarah had been fulfilled. He had survived, loved, and cherished life again. The war had taken much from him, but it had not taken his heart. And in the smiles of Emily and Lucy, he saw the future, bright, hopeful, and full of love. John's life was no longer defined by loss, but by love. He had learned that even when life seems impossible, miracles can happen in quiet, unexpected ways. And through it all, he carried Sarah's memory in his heart, honored in every laugh, hug, and tender moment shared with the daughters she had left behind. In the end, John Matthews had not just survived, he had truly lived.